So it is the top of the hour. We'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our Intelligent Records Management webinar, The Next Horizon in Information Management. We appreciate you all being here. In the next slide, first I'd like to introduce today's speakers. We have David Quackenbush, Gimel CEO. Oh, I apologize. It's the slide after the housekeeping. But first, the housekeeping is the webinar is being recorded. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please submit questions via the question panel because after today's webinar, we will be having a live Q&A session, and we'll answer as many of those questions as we can get to. Secondly, if you have any technical difficulties, please submit that through the chat window so that we can help you solve any issues that you might be having. So then I will introduce the speakers on the next slide. First, we have David Quackenbush, that is Gimel's CEO, here with us, our fearless leader. My name is Matthew Deeden, and I am the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Gimel. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Quackenbush so he can go through the agenda for today.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody, depending on which time zone you're in. As Matt said, this is David Quackenbush. I'm the CEO of Gimel, and I believe we've got a nice agenda here for you in this webinar to really kind of talk about what a lot of people are talking about these days, and that is automation and the automation wave going on across most of our client organizations and its relationship to records and information management. So I'm going to dig right in. Here's our agenda. We'll talk a little bit about this automation wave and records and information management. We'll talk specifically about robotic process automation and how it relates to records and information management. And I'll do my best to not use acronyms as much as possible, although there's probably lots of acronyms in this presentation. And then do a little bit of a discussion around the future of next generation, where this is going, and then how to get started. And then we'll also leave plenty of time for questions. We appreciate everybody's attendance today, and hopefully this will be a great session for you to get some new information about how to apply automation in your business. So, you know, the automation wave is an interesting one right now. I think everybody's talking about it in some way, shape, or form across a variety of business domains. And, you know, today, digital transformation and all the other trends that are going on, macro trends that are going on in corporate America and throughout the world are the big buzz. And then behind the scenes there, in terms of enabling and really making that happen, is this automation wave, and it's artificial intelligence, and it's machine learning, and it's natural language processing, and a whole bunch of other new or semi-new acronyms that are coming into being mainstream. I think a lot of these concepts have been around for a long time, but they're now starting to become mainstream. So it's an exciting time for everybody. I've thrown this slide up on a number of my presentations in the past. Disruption is, you know, something that we often use when we start talking about technology change and what's going on out there with these so-called disruptors in the market that are accelerating change faster than maybe some people want to accelerate. But, you know, the truth is disruption is something that happens to us every day. It surrounds us. It's in front of our eyes. It's disguised as a variety of different things, and it's subtle until it hits us over the head like a 2x4. And so I don't see any of the things happening today from this disruptive technology as being, wow, they just showed up last week and they're all kind of taking over our screens. These are things that have been happening for quite some time now and are just now, again, really becoming mainstream and therefore really becoming disruptive. So if you think about automation and think about extending automation to the world of records and information management, there's a couple of interesting things here. One is, you know, automation and the capabilities of these technologies today will most certainly reduce the amount of repetitive work associated with records management and other related tasks in the organization. And the benefit of this is really going to be allowing next generation records managers to focus on things that are more important, which is dealing with the real challenges of records, dealing with the real business problems of being able to find information at the right time and produce it for a variety of reasons, whether that be discovery requests, whether that be other business matters, mergers and acquisitions, client problems, all kinds of things where it's important to be able to quickly get access to information to solve those problems. Automation is also going to simplify the ability to solve a long-standing problem around being able to consistently classify information as it's being onboarded into the enterprise. Probably one of the biggest challenges every organization has that we come into connection with. So probably that means the vast majority of businesses in general is being able to onboard information, and particularly unstructured information, documents and those types of media, in a way where they're classified consistently and therefore much easier to apply a wide range of rules to that content, whether that be records management rules, whether that be security rules, whether that be other types of compliance rules like privacy rules and things like that. And perhaps for the day-to-day business person, more importantly, the kind of rules and classifications that allow that content to be more easily surfaced and more simply surfaced in a search, in a basic search that someone might request content around. And ultimately, automation is going to solve these challenges of what I would describe as a faceted taxonomy challenge for an organization, which is I've got to classify for security, for retention, for findability, all these kinds of things. Being able to do that automatically and with higher quality and higher scalability is really the opportunity that automation is going to provide. So if you think about the world that we live in today, and you're looking about records and information management and automation, it looks like this. You've got information, and surrounding information, you have all these different types of attributes that one needs to apply to a particular piece of information to actually make it useful in the organization. And bit by bit, you look at each one and say, well, what are the rules associated with retention? What are the rules tied to GDPR and PII and HIPAA and other things around compliance, and how do I identify those pieces of content that bring risk in that area? Who has access to what from a security perspective? Who can really look at these documents and use them? And again, ultimately, for the end user, I just really want to see and get what I need to do my job. And if you think about that and how it extends in today's world and in the world of digital transformation, where it's a lot of bring your own device, a lot of people on the go using mobile devices in general to do their work, whether it be phones or tablets or the like, the idea that any people would do a search and get 200 items on a phone makes it totally unusable as a device for getting work done. They've got to figure out a way to limit that search so that they see 3 or 4 things, and of the 3 or 4 things they see on that screen, one of them is what they were actually looking for. So this is the world we live in. This is the world where applying automation is going to do the most good by being able to solve these problems, because the other challenge, obviously, with all this is it looks like a lot of different types of information have to be collected about a document in order to solve all these problems. And we as humans typically don't like to manually apply all that information document by document as we're bringing on board. And in many cases, we might not even know what the right information to apply is. So being able to automate that behind the scenes is critically important. And the systems, I think more importantly today, master data sources and things like that, along with being able to leverage true advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence, are going to be the foundational elements that allow this kind of automation to occur. So the next challenge in the world of records and information management and how automation is going to be hugely helpful is really eliminating the unknowns. And you think about a simple diagram like this, you have a variety of different unknowns and knowns in the organization as it relates to information. You've got, in the bottom left-hand corner, unknown unknowns. I call that dark data. And that dark data is, in places where people do not know where and what information exists in some of these old repositories. And it may be things like people that have left the company and it's in their personal drive that was never migrated or inspected, and it's just sitting out there, and it's got records in it, but no one knows how to get at it because it's just been sitting out there dormant. It represents a lot of things. You've got silos of information. So silos of information might be departmental systems, or they might be someone's personal cache of information on their desktop or something else that they've got that nobody else really knows much about and knows what to do with it. You've got your official repositories of record, and those might be things like SharePoint, or it might be more traditional document and records management tools like OpenText or Documentum or FileNet or Highland. You can kind of go down the list, and those official repositories. And then you've got this category of content, the sort of unknown knowns, which might be systems like Maximo or other line of business systems that are very specific, that are storing content that nobody has access to but those line of business users. And in each case, really you're starting to figure out, how am I going to move all this data, surface it, understand what it is, and then somehow get it into whatever my official repositories of records are. And again, if you think about the task of doing that manually, and we run into this quite frequently, people start to do the analysis and they see the enormity of the task, and it usually stops most of these projects in their tracks. This is another great place where automation will be able to do a lot to really sift through this information, at least partially classify it to the point where people know what to do with it in terms of making it usable in one of the official repositories, and just as importantly, or destroying it because it's expired information, it's superfluous, it's trash, it's whatever other state it's in that really is unnecessary for the organization to have in its repositories. And the other challenge that we all face is you look at a life cycle of information and you look at it from how we're going to look at all these different repositories, and you go through this stage of analyzing it and cleaning it up, organizing it, then managing it, and ultimately disposing of it. And you think about today, there wasn't too long ago where the general mindset of most people in the world of document and records management were saying, oh yeah, we need to have this monolithic view of the world, and if it's important information or if it's record information, we just need to funnel all this into a single repository for proper management, and then allow the right people to have access to that system so that they can use the information. Those days are really gone. I think the idea today is that most people believe this problem isn't going to be about having fewer repositories. It's going to be about how do I manage the growth in repositories and then leverage the repositories I know I'm going to use in my environment, because it's an ever-growing list. It's not like these are getting smaller and smaller. You've got your traditional ECM systems, you've got traditional record systems. They might be physical records management systems that are separate from your standard ECM system. You've got SharePoint and Office 365 and OneDrive for Business and where that's going. You've got your file shares. You've got email. You've got line of business systems. And then you've got all these cloud environments. Maybe it's Spring or Alfresco or Nuxio. Maybe it's cloud sync and share technologies like Box or M-Files or OneDrive, Dropbox, etc. And as well, then think about all the new collaboration tools, whether it be Microsoft Teams or Slack or what have you. And you start to see that the likelihood of this content shrinking into fewer repositories is less likely than expanding into more. In fact, most of the conversations that we have today with any client or prospective client, they're at the point now where IT looks like more of an integration organization as opposed to a technology organization, and they're really there to support the business. And when the business says, hey, from what I'm trying to do, I think Box is a good application for me, so I'm going to start managing my content in Box. They're like, great, that sounds good. Let's talk about how we integrate what's in Box to other systems that you're going to need to use in order to make that an effective tool for you, as opposed to saying, no, we're not doing that. You just need to put everything in Documentum or OpenText or SharePoint. So now a little bit more on RPA and its direct applicability for RIM. And I think one of the things about RPA, robotic process automation, is because it's such a popular term and because everyone wants to jump on the bandwagon, what you have to now start to do is figure out, well, what's really an RPA solution from its skipping cousin, business process automation, or perhaps what some people now are calling digital process automation. So we'll try to talk a little bit about that in this section. Just for clarity, we think of RPA, and this is a pretty standard definition, as software that can automate repetitive rules-based tasks that are performed by people on a computer using the same system. So basically anything that is done today by humans but is pretty standard and repetitive, are going to be great uses of robotic process automation tools. And interestingly enough, I mean, it's a good term because what you see with most of these tools is you see a desktop environment where it's just automating tasks sitting next to the person that's doing their day job. So it really does sort of fit that view of a robot actually doing things. It's mimicking actions. It's operating on application systems because it knows how to access the right application systems and the kinds of questions it needs to ask those applications. It can work on structured data and unstructured data. Actually, it's continuous, so it's a 7 by 24, 24 by 7 type of activity, which again allows for a lot more work to be done in a time frame, and generally speaking, different than implementing, workflow and other types of systems that require, in some cases, very large projects. These things tend to be faster to implement and also very scalable. Here's some benefits and business drivers. This comes straight from Gartner. So what Gartner promotes from a benefits perspective in terms of reductions of time for FTEs to work on these tasks, increasing productivity, better audit trails, higher availability. Probably the most important thing for the average business person is that it leads to really allowing the business person to be doing what they should be doing all along, which is being the problem solver, being the professional problem solver, and really getting the real knowledge work done as opposed to doing all the background tasks necessary to solve problems. And of course, error-free data processing, because nobody gets the fat finger or anything by accident. This is all done by these robots that are less likely to make errors on mundane tasks. Business drivers, quick implementation cycles, low cost of doing these kinds of projects. It's pretty pervasive across the enterprise. It runs in the background so it doesn't get in people's way. And for the most part so far, the ROI has been pretty quickly realized. And one of the things we'll do at the end of this is go through a couple of real world case examples of where we've seen this work and be effective. So who uses robotic process automation? Today, most of you on the phone, if you've been in touch with it at all, have probably seen it around accounting processes, in particular accounts payable. It's really probably the biggest, most highest used form of RPA, though I'll tell you that what we've seen in a variety of use cases in various industries is more and more things around various HR processes, other types of accounting functions that one might have thought in the old days was really require a specific expertise to work on can be also handled by these tools because they all possess a common backdrop, which is a set of rules that is fairly persistent and not dynamic. Trading is another area where RPA has great applicability and is being applied regularly as well. And then when you think about document-centric processes, again, we see it as a world full of opportunity for auto classification, automating the life cycle of information, and ultimately ensuring adherence to policy by doing a lot of these things that are things that humans typically don't like to do with document-centric business processes. So how are your typical business process automation and robotic process automation systems different? You know, workflow tools, BPA, DPA, they're better at really focusing on enabling standardization of business process. RPA is really more about accelerating of that. So they work hand in glove. They're not this or that. They really work together. You're not going to replace a workflow system with an RPA tool. You're going to leverage whatever that workflow system is using the RPA tool to accelerate it. With workflow, you're automating tasks, but human error is still very possible because the human is actually the one doing the work when the workflow tool puts the next step in that person's inbox or queue or what have you to perform a task. On the RPA side, that's all automated, so the human error goes way down. I'm managing costs in a workflow environment versus I'm reducing costs in RPA, and the reduction in cost is more about changing how work gets done. So again, think about, you know, workflow doesn't really change how work gets done. It makes it more efficient because it standardizes the steps or moves things along a path more quickly. RPA is about changing how work gets done. So instead of needing 10 people to do accounts payable processing, maybe I just need 2 or 3 that are really focused on solving problems around accounts payable, and the rest of that stuff can get done in the background, so I can reallocate resources to more important job functions. And you know, one of the interesting things I think that most people are writing about RPA today, just as an aside, is the concern in organizations about, you know, taking away jobs from people. I think the view is that more likely held, and we certainly aspire to believe in as well, is that's not going to happen, number one, because the general labor shortage that exists for knowledge workers in general, but number two, being able to apply people to jobs that are more productive by automating a lot of these background tasks is really what most organizations would prefer to do anyhow. So there's plenty of other things that people can be doing that are going to be more likely to help the business as opposed to just getting work done in a lot of cases. So here's a few ways to compare and contrast where you would apply these things to, and some of this is somewhat repetitive from the prior slide. I think the things to focus on here are, you know, anything I can do with a robot according to a fine schedule, set of rules, those kind of things are going to be great use cases to apply RPA. If I still need to have people involved in the business process to get something done, then I'm clearly going to be enabling those kinds of business processes just with traditional workflow, BPA, DPA types of tools. That's probably the biggest difference you're going to see here. Getting rid of the repetition, being able to cross organizational boundaries. So a lot of times what we see, even in the best intended organizations, workflow applications still tend to stop at the barriers of departments because of a variety of reasons. Most of them have to do with being able to agree on business process and workflow across departmental lines. RPA can eliminate a lot of that, because again, we're taking the human element out of a lot of those tasks. Here's some examples of leading technologies. This isn't an exhaustive list. This is just some of what we believe are more of the market leaders in the space today, but there are literally, hundreds of companies now claiming to provide robotic process automation technology to the marketplace. So, but if you think about the 800-pound gorillas, clearly UiPath, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, they're right up there as the big three that most organizations that we come in contact with are either piloting or evaluating as something they're going to incorporate into their IT environments. So what does the next generation look like, and how do these tools really start to be helpful in a variety of different ways in terms of automating RIM types of tasks? One for sure, and we've had this conversation with many organizations now, both consuming organizations being clients and things like that, as well as other technology vendors that are trying to provide better technology in this space, is using automation to apply layers of intelligence to content. So again, back to my example of dark data, being able to run a process to continually look at content, maybe it's very, very poorly classified or unclassified, and figuring out, sort of one pass at a time, ways to extract metadata across that content that brings more consistency and commonality to it, so that something can be done with it. And again, something done more in an automated fashion, as opposed to humans having to go through and go, wow, I don't know if I can look at 10,000 documents over any period of time without going crazy. So this continual content enrichment by repetition. And again, this is where, when you think about the world of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and those concepts have been around for quite some time, the tools are really good today, and they're getting better all the time. But the one thing that they need is they need to be successful and to be really good at the large data set, and more importantly, consistently higher quality data set. So the more quality improves, the better these AI and machine learning tools can be at fully auto-classifying things, fully being able to enable life cycles of information behind the scenes automatically. Otherwise, you're still having to deal with garbage in, garbage out. If you've got a small data set, you're still going to be constrained by how effective these tools can be around predictive kinds of activities as it relates to document typing and different types of metadata that you might apply and policy you might apply to that content. Another thing that we see more than likely to occur is, again, through this continuous processing, is helping to quickly identify exceptions that humans need to deal with because the machine's not going to be able to do it. And in a sea of information, oftentimes it all starts to look the same, and using a machine to look at that, the machine never gets bored, the machine doesn't get cross-eyed looking at all this stuff. It just keeps processing, and a lot of times can be more effective at identifying the exception and saying, oh, there's the dog, that's the one I'm looking for, and being able to pull that out of the stack and have somebody work on it because that's what they were needing to do in the first place. So what's the RIM imperative going forward? Being able to identify, organize, and manage content in these forms, unstructured primarily, but I don't think that's going to last long either. I think it's going to be all information. But today, let's just think of it as documents and voice messages and email and social media and the dearth of information that's being created every day in systems that people would consider unstructured. Source independence. Again, I should be able to capture information from anywhere with a simple save motion, and that simple save motion has the ability to identify what the right metadata is for that particular piece of information. It has the ability to figure out what repository that information belongs, and it has the ability to notify the business person of where that document was stored, So when they do a search or when they want to bring it up again, they know exactly where to find it. The things that we hate to do, automation should be able to do from a source independence perspective. Think about being in Word and just hitting save, and all the things you needed to do with that document get handled automatically. Content is business driven for access and collaboration. Again, probably one of the biggest challenges that everybody faces is, how do I surface the relevant content to somebody at the right time when they're needing it most? And nowadays, that extends itself out to the fringes of the network. And if I'm mobile, if I'm on a tablet and I'm out in the field in a low bandwidth area, the last thing I want to do is run a search and get 200 items in my search that takes forever to build because I don't have much bandwidth, and then have to scroll through and try to find which one I like. I really want to get to the best view very quickly. So that's got to be the end result of all this activity, is how to make that really occur. How do I really make governance policy automatic and apply via these technologies of artificial intelligence to the different structures that they're going to be applied to? And again, how do I do it across all of the different domains of whether it's a record policy, whether it's a privacy policy, whether it's a security policy, that are going to make that information as highly protected as it possibly can be. And this isn't point in time activity. This is an evergreen and evolving process. It can't just be a one time and then I'm done. I'm never going to be done, right? I have to establish and we see this happening quite regularly now. We've got RIM organizations all over the companies we work with, that their whole job is really trying to put a ring around this for the entire company and make sure that it's constantly being managed appropriately. And then being able to separate efficiency from effectiveness, and knowing that the goal of any technology initiative has both elements to it. How do I make things efficient and therefore continue to lower my costs of operation? And then how do I also make them effective? And sometimes in the past, those have come into conflict with one another. And I think in the New World Order, both are available and both are required to make success happen. And again, if you think about the average user out there, the average business person, they don't really care about tech. They don't really care about technology. They don't care about all the buzzwords. They want something that's going to work and work the way they want it to work, period. And the thing that today gets in the way for most organizations is, again, good enough should be good enough, and not letting great get in the way of good enough, because it's an overwhelming task. And the goal ought to be, I can get 20% of the way there this year, and maybe 40% next year, and maybe 5 years from now, I'm 80% to complete. And that may be as good as I'll ever get, because I'm in a dynamic environment where I'll never attain perfection. And because I can't attain perfection doesn't mean I shouldn't start the process anyway, because this problem just gets worse and worse over time regardless. It also really needs to become part of the corporate fabric. And the benefits of doing so are, things like getting rid of data cholesterol in the organization. Again, one of the biggest challenges facing most organizations isn't the fact that there's a lot of information, there's a lot of unusable information getting in the way of the usable information. So how do I get rid of that data cholesterol? Really taking an asset management approach to management of information, like you do with all the other assets in your business. Organizations have paid lip service to the idea that information is an asset, but until it's treated like one, like any other hard asset in the business in terms of maintenance and operations, you're still going to continue to have the same challenges. So an important concept to be successful. And again, it's not something that can be done in one project. It's a program, and it's an evergreen program that really needs its own resources and its own charter. When you think about automation and you think about the risks associated with that, they exist as well. You know, as I mentioned before, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and natural language processing systems, in order to be really good, require large volumes of data, and they need to be high-quality data sets. You can't just pour garbage in there and expect them to do their thing like it's magic. You still have to have a well-designed business model and tested business model to make these tools work the way you want them to. They're not a panacea for still thinking about a project the way you would in terms of any other kind of system design and conceptual design leading to an implementation of something physical. And again, when you think about scaling and security, you've got to continue to look at those as important inputs into this process, because again, you're dealing with a lot of information that's in various states, and high volumes of it. So being able to scale, and more importantly, making sure that security is maintained throughout are important tenets and important risks to look out for. So getting started, this is pretty much like you'd expect. These projects aren't really wildly different than any other project. You still need a plan to get started. You know, what's my target business processes? How do I define success? Do I need to redefine business process, because automating bad process is still bad process. So you can't, again, these tools aren't going to fix bad processes. You still have to improve them on the way in to get what you want. How do I prioritize candidates? Because what's going to happen is everyone's going to want some of this as they start to see it become successful in other business areas in the corporation. What are the standards that we're going to need? Because we don't want to implement 400 versions of this in the organization. We need to adopt standards so that these systems and these robotic processes and automation is done consistently throughout the enterprise. And then, you know, your typical, how do I define projects and how do I manage projects? And probably most importantly, adoption is still the big issue. And again, when you think about automation and when you think about things like robotic automation and the kinds of fear, uncertainty, and doubt that puts in people's minds, change management becomes a critical success factor, and doing change well becomes critically important. And it's not for everything, and it's not for everyone. These projects not done properly will fail just like any other project that you have that's not done well. So there's no panacea brought to the table from that perspective with RPA, and it's not for everything. So you can't just assume that you're going to automate and make everything work with these robotic tools, even when you've got situations where everything looks like it's standard and everything looks like it's rules-based. You're going to still have areas where it just doesn't make sense, because maybe your business process is more exception and less standard. And so in that case, maybe RPA doesn't really bring you as much benefit as you'd like, because you're always dealing with exceptions. And well thought out governance plan is essential for success across all these areas: operational governance, technology governance, risk management, and measurement. So I'll leave you with a couple of examples before I turn it over to questions. One, these are real world examples. Here's one that involves an HR process that dealt with thousands of leave requests per month. So think of a global enterprise, and you know, tens and twenties of thousands of people strewn across the world that are needing to process some sort of leave request with HR, and how RPA can take a lot of that stuff and really automate it and make it a much more streamlined and effective process in terms of being able to read the request because I'm using standard forms, validate the request with the HR systems because I have rules around leave and those rules are embedded in my HR systems, pull additional information from those systems and other systems needed to complete the processing of that request, process it, and update the employee file, whatever that process looks like, with an approved or denied status for that leave request. And again, in some companies' case, that means I got to print it out and send it to somebody to actually put in a physical file. In other cases, it might be routing to just their electronic record and managing appropriately. And then notifying the appropriate people that believe request has in fact either been approved or denied. All that's done through a robotic operation. The results were reduced processing time significantly. The error rate went to 0, and an ROI was achieved in 6 months. And again, this is real world stuff. These aren't made up examples. Here's another one that involves auto classification, and this one was a pretty simple exercise of adding a document into a SharePoint document library, but the system was set up such that it was sitting there, the end user was looking at their desktop, they added a document to SharePoint, a desktop bot wakes up on the add action, it launches business applications behind the scenes where it needs to grab metadata for that particular document to be properly classified, scrapes that data, applies it to the proper columns in SharePoint, and finalizes the document add. So again, pretty simplistic, but pretty effective, again, when you think about if I'm doing this 20, 30 times a day, and now I've got a machine that's just constantly making sure that all my steps are done correctly. I'm going to do them a lot faster, which were the results I got. I got consistently applied metadata every time, so no mistakes were made. And I got out of the business of having to do all these basic lookups in these systems and trying to cut and paste or whatever method I was using manually to improve that process. So those are some examples. There's lots of others, and I suspect as if we have this conversation again in 6 months or a year, there'll be a whole lot of other real world examples applying these types of technologies to day-to-day activities that are happening in the records and information management world that we all live in. So with that, I'm going to wrap things up, turn it back over to Matt, and be happy to field any questions.
Thank you very much, Quack. Great presentation. Like Quack said, we'll head into the Q&A session now. So if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A button. We do already have some here for you, Quack. So I'll go ahead and read those in the order they were received. How does RPA currently exist and work with the current GIML records management product?
So great question. So much like any other product, our product would be just another system that would either utilize and call a robot to perform some action, or would be called by a robot to perform some action, and again, depending on what that action was. And so if you think about maybe, for instance, with our governance product, if I'm dragging and dropping a piece of content to auto-classify in a drop zone, I could call a robot as part of that action that would further auto-classify a document beyond what we do out of the box today by going and reaching into various master data systems. And the benefit of doing so with that versus how we might do it otherwise is I don't have to write a bunch of custom code and APIs to go integrate with master data systems. I can just simply set up a screen scrape exercise with the robot to do that. Okay.
Real quick, everyone should have seen a poll pop up on their screen. If everyone would just take a quick second and answer those questions, I think it'd be really cool. Again, they are anonymous, but it'd be really nice to see how everyone is currently planning on enhancing the records management processes, what pains they currently have, what content repositories everyone's using, how often everyone's organization relies primarily on end users to supply metadata, and then how many people are responsible for records management and compliance within the organization. So if everyone can go through and answer those questions, again, it is anonymous, and we can kind of share the results with the group, and we can kind of see where everyone is ending up. The next question I have here is, as a records manager, what should I understand first and foremost as I adapt my skills to manage automation?
Well, that's an excellent question. In our opinion, what we see there is really allowing records managers to become more of the leads in these records and information management changes in the organization. So instead of being the one that's processing requests for getting information from its various sources, they're actually kind of leading the change in terms of driving organizations to better ways of managing, capturing content, consistently classifying it, identifying the exceptions, working through some of the change management associated with gaining adoption with end users, and really solving problems more on a regular basis as opposed to just dealing with the various forms of requests and looking for information that nobody knows its whereabouts.
Perfect. Next question I have here is, what kind of change management would robotic process automation incur in information management?
Well, I think the main area is when you think about automating anything, and I think in the back of most people's minds when you hear this term of robotic process automation, it tends to paint a pretty bleak picture for the average knowledge worker in terms of, well, what am I going to do if this robot's doing all these things? That's what I do every day. And again, when you consider it from the big picture, this is all about changing how work gets done. And again, that train has left the station. This whole concept of digital transformation isn't about technology for technology's sake. This is really just another code name for we have to change how work gets done in the world today because of our disconnected nature, because of the requirements of the next generation of knowledge workers and what they expect when they show up on the scene. So change management takes on a really in the driver's seat, if you will, in these initiatives, making sure that people in the organization aren't fearing robotic process automation, but in fact embracing it so that it allows them to actually do more of the work that they were hired to do in the first place, as opposed to being the exact opposite today. What we find is most people spend more time looking for information and or trying to manage it as opposed to using it. I think most people would rather just use it and have all the rest of that stuff done for them automatically.
Okay, perfect. Next question we have here is, how does robotic automation work if my company has content in many different information silos? Based on your implementation, how successful is this?
So actually one of the advantages of RPA is that being able to, again, eliminate the need of me going to 5 different information silos manually. I can get robots to do that based on a series of consistent requests that I need to do where I'm doing that today manually. So it's actually a great application to be able to go find information. And in fact, we had a request the other day for exactly that somebody is saying, I need to go, so think of an e-discovery request or something like that, or some other kind of request for information. And that's, in the world we live in, we do a lot of work in the government space where these information requests are becoming more and more prevalent, whether it be a FOIA request, whether it be other sunshine laws in other states that information requests are becoming more and more prevalent. Being able to create robots to go out and look for all this information because I haven't implemented federated searching or maybe consistency around my content is a great use case for robots.
Great, great. The next question we have is, what do you know about Office 365 auto classification capabilities?
Well, it depends on what you mean by auto classification abilities in Office 365. Office 365 has some current fairly powerful capabilities as it relates to this for things that, whether again it's applying, again, think about things like labels and other kinds of things in advanced data governance that Office 365 provides that can provide some of this. Our experience has been with SharePoint in particular, but I think generally speaking with any kind of ECM tool, is that auto classification inside these tools is great if you're looking for easily found information that has something to do with an organization unit, or maybe found in Active Directory or associated with the user. But the minute I start looking into business systems or needing business data that may not exist in those environments, they kind of stop short of being very effective there. And so it kind of depends on the kinds of auto classification you're looking to do.
Okay, okay. Next question we have is, how does RPA differ from the intelligent tagging applications that have been in use for years?
So another great question, and I'd have to know, I probably need to know more specifics around what intelligent tagging solutions you're using. But if you think about, the things that we think about in that regard, typical content extraction tools, whether it be things that look at content like an active navigation or concept searching, or some of the things provided by some of the OCR or capture vendors today in terms of intelligent capture and zones and things like that. In and of itself, there's not, and in fact, RPA technologies would leverage those technologies to pull content out. You have to think about that in terms of a work stream, is that might be one step in a work stream that I'm trying to automate behind the scenes. So I might leverage one of those tools to pull content out and use it for metadata, and then apply it to whatever system I was using.
Perfect. And we have closed the poll, so I just want to go through real quick and take a look at the responses here with you, David. So is your organization currently planning on enhancing records management processes within the next 18 months? 42% said yes, which I think is actually, we've seen that number continuously increase as we continue to ask those questions on our webinars. So it's great to see that organizations are taking the initiative and making that a top priority. The next question we have is, what pains are you currently experiencing with your records management process? 42% said physical and electronic records are managed separately. And then 37%, which came in second, was inability to apply policies across multiple systems. Now, I know this is something that we definitely talk about often. This is something that Gimel really strives to solve. David, do you want to talk about that anymore?
I think it's an obvious challenge. What we've seen, interestingly, recently this year, is a renewed emphasis on getting a better handle on physical records management in general. And I think most of that has to do with making it easier to find, for the end user to find content that's stored in these physical environments, whether they be, standard file room or offsite storage facilities, but being able to at least give people an idea of where content may live in these physical repositories.
Great. Number 3, which content repositories are you currently using? 74% responded SharePoint, 37% responded Office 365. Obviously, we are starting to see that number shift a little bit. We're starting to see people migrate from those SharePoint platforms to Office 365 and adopt that cloud model. We had 63% answer others. I'm going to assume that those probably are things like file shares. And then we have 24% answered OneDrive. I don't think we've ever seen OneDrive that high before. Quack, do you want to speak to that at all, or those choices?
Yeah, I mean, it looks pretty typical. I think the drive to Office 365 automatically sort of embeds the concept of OneDrive being part of those activities, probably much the same as SharePoint. In SharePoint Online and Office 365, there's probably overlap there as well. Your comment about shared drives is probably exactly correct on the others, but there's probably other line of business systems. What we see are just the typical Maximos and other, line of business systems, whether it be contract management systems or what have you, that are probably made up of that other area. And others that we see, interesting, even it's a low number here, but for instance, Box, we see Box more and more becoming a kind of a growing use in many of the people that we talk to today in conjunction with their move to the cloud. So whether that's even Office 365, they're going to Office 365 and Box as an example.
Yep. Number 4 here is, how often does your organization rely primarily on end users to supply metadata to digital content? 37% answered always and usually, and then we have 8% answering never. So that is a common theme that we see, that organizations are still leaving it up to the end users to supply metadata to that digital content and ensure that, one, they do it, and then two, ensure that they do it correctly, which can sometimes, more often than not, cause problems.
Yep. Makes sense. I mean, I think, the biggest challenge that most companies have with metadata today, and have for a long time, frankly, is the crossroads of not enough and too much. And, most people still today believe that in order to make something ultimately searchable and findable, you need to make sure you have plenty of metadata associated with all the different access paths you want to choose to find it. That's probably, with the power of the search tools today and other things around that, more of a myth that can be solved with less metadata, which makes it just a lot easier for people in general in being able to properly classify content.
Yep. And then last question here is, how many people are responsible for records management and compliance in your organization? 45% answered 5 or more, 55% answered less than 5. I think this is a shift that we also continue to see, that 5 or more is becoming more of the dominant area as new regulations and standards continue to come out. Things like GDPR, records management and compliance in a whole is becoming definitely more of a priority in many organizations.
Yeah, I think we see a world today where, as companies start to take this seriously, they have to have, again, I think the term records and information managers are becoming, sort of broadening a bit. These information owners that can be, and they need to be somewhat subject matter experts in some cases in order to be good at it. So they're becoming more and more in the fabric of large organizations that are managing, massive amounts of information, and it's coming in greater quantities every day.
Yep. So we are almost at the top of the hour, but I do have one last question here for you. What kind of overhead does AI-ML tool or AI-ML tool provide as far as having yet another repository for managing metadata on content?
So it's a good question. Typically most of these tools don't have their own repository. They're there to evaluate in place and then hopefully help you make suggestions around what you might do to make it more usable in terms of extracting metadata and things like that, but not really having their own repository. So from a repository perspective, probably limited. But again, when you think about how these tools operate, there's not any magic to them. It's having the enough computing resource, particularly with very large data sets, to allow them to efficiently do their work without interrupting other normal processes in technology architecture.
Great. Well, we are at the top of the hour, so I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We really hope you enjoyed the webinar. So in this webinar, you really did hear the why as to records management. Please attend our Intelligent Records Management next week, where we're really going to get into the how, and we're going to get into the tools that Gimel provides that really will enable you to implement those proper records management processes. So please join us next week for that. You can sign up for that on our website. But without further ado, David, thank you very much for hosting this with us and speaking to this with us. If anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to Gimel at info@gimel.com, or just go to our website, www.gimel.com, and just fill out the contact us form, and we'll make sure to reach out to you as soon as possible. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. Appreciate everybody's attendance. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your week.